Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive.
Excited to be here.
Today we're going to be looking at Airbnb's stock performance.
Sounds interesting.
Yeah, we've got a whole bunch of reports and analyses,
Uh-huh.
and even though they had a really strong Q3 in 2024,
Right.
some analysts are saying that the stock might be overvalued.
Hmm.
So we really want to break it down for you today and let you know what's going on.
That's a good idea. There's a lot of talk about it.
So let's just get started with the basics.
Okay.
Most people probably already know Airbnb connects hosts with guests for stays and experiences worldwide.
Right.
But what are the analysts saying about their business model and its ability to just generate consistent profits?
Yeah, so one thing the reports highlight is that they don't really have a wide economic moat,
Okay.
which basically means they're facing a lot of competition.
Even though they're popular?
Yeah, exactly. Despite their popularity, there are a lot of other players in the market.
So that makes some analysts cautious.
For sure.
All right, so that brings us to their Q3 2024 performance. What really stood out to you there?
Well, it's kind of a mixed bag.
Okay.
I mean, on one hand, the revenue actually exceeded expectations,
Well,
and they also showed strong profitability,
that's good.
which is definitely a positive.
Right.
However, there are still those concerns about the valuation of the stock.
So it's not just a clear buy signal right now.
Not necessarily.
Okay. Well, let's dive a little deeper into that Q3 performance.
Sure.
Let's start with the good stuff.
Okay.
The reports mentioned strong growth in bookings. What do you think drove that?
Well, they saw really strong growth in both like the number of nights booked
Uh-huh.
and experiences booked, and this is throughout Q3.
Okay.
And they're saying that this upward trend is going to continue,
Wow.
which is a really good sign that there is still a strong demand for their services.
So they're expecting even more growth.
Yeah, that's what it looks like.
Okay, well, aside from just the number of bookings going up, what about their strategic initiatives? Did they have any big achievements in Q3?
Yeah, they've been really focusing on three main strategies.
Okay.
Making hosting mainstream,
Okay.
perfecting their core service,
Uh-huh.
and expanding beyond just their core offerings.
Got it. So making it more than just a place to stay.
Exactly. And we're actually seeing some really good progress in all these areas.
Can you give us some specific examples of what they're actually doing?
Yeah, so for example, they launched this thing called the co-host network.
What is that?
It basically helps new hosts by pairing them up with more experienced hosts.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so they can get some guidance and support.
Kind of like a mentorship program.
Yeah, exactly. And it's actually doing better than they expected,
Wow.
which is a good sign for attracting more hosts to the platform.
So it sounds like they're not just relying on organic growth.
Right.
They're actively trying to make it easier for people to become hosts.
Exactly. They're working on making it more accessible.
What about the second initiative? What are they doing to improve their core service?
Well, in the past 3 years, they've rolled out over 535 new features and upgrades.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, they're clearly investing a lot in making the user experience better.
So what kind of things are we talking about?
Oh, like better search functions, more detailed listings, and a much bigger emphasis on safety and reliability.
To making sure people have a good experience when they use Airbnb.
Yeah, basically.
Okay, and finally, their expansion beyond accommodations. What's happening with that?
Well, they're seeing really strong growth in some of the newer, less saturated markets.
Okay, so like new countries or regions.
Yeah.
So it sounds like their expansion into new territories is going well.
Yeah, it's definitely a key part of their growth strategy.
All right, so we've seen a lot of positives with their Q3 performance.
Definitely.
But we also know there are some concerns, particularly about whether the stock is actually overvalued.
Right.
So what are some potential issues that the analysts are flagging?
One thing they're worried about is the tougher year-over-year comparisons that are expected in Q4.
What do you mean?
Well, basically, Q3 2023 was kind of a unique situation,
Uh-huh.
so it'll be hard to beat those numbers.
I see.
And on top of that, Airbnb is planning some pretty big investments.
Okay.
And those could actually end up impacting their profits in the short term.
So they're spending money to grow, but it might hurt their profits temporarily.
Yeah, that's the concern.
I'd love to hear more about those investments and what their long-term vision is.
Me too.
But before we get into that, let's talk about what the analysts are saying about the stock's valuation.
All right, let's do that.
Right.
Yeah, so when we look at what the analysts are saying about the stock,
Okay.
there's a pretty big range of price targets out there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they go all the way from a low of like $50 a share
Okay.
to a high of 170.
Wow. So that's
That's a huge spread.
a huge spread.
It shows you that the experts don't really agree on what Airbnb is actually worth.
That's interesting. So why is there such a big difference in opinion?
Well, you have some analysts like Evercore ISI and Bernstein
Okay.
who are really bullish on Airbnb.
Bullish. So they think it's going to do well.
Yeah, they're impressed with the company's growth so far.
Okay.
And they think there's a lot of potential for them to keep expanding.
Especially internationally.
Right, exactly. They see a big opportunity there.
So they're the ones setting those higher price targets.
Exactly.
Okay, but we know that not everyone is so optimistic. What are the more cautious analysts saying?
Well, firms like Goldman Sachs
Okay.
and Truist Financial,
Yeah.
they're a bit more cautious. They're the ones setting those lower price targets.
It.
They're worried about growth slowing down in Airbnb's core markets.
So like the places where they're already really popular?
Yeah, exactly. And they're also concerned about competition heating up,
So they think the current valuation might be a little too high?
basically.
Yeah. So we have some analysts who are really excited about Airbnb's future
Yeah,
and others who are a bit more hesitant.
right.
So how does someone listening to this make sense of all of that?
Well, one thing to look at is the average analyst price target,
Okay.
which right now is around $134.
Okay.
But it's important to remember that's just an average.
Right. It doesn't tell the whole story.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It doesn't really reflect the range of opinions out there
Right.
or why those analysts feel the way they do.
The report also mentions a calculated fair value estimate.
Oh, yeah.
What is that?
So that's a bit different from the analyst price targets.
Okay.
It's basically a way to try to figure out what the stock should actually be worth,
Based on.
based on things like their projected earnings, their cash flow, their risk level, all sorts of financial factors.
Now, what's the fair value estimate for Airbnb?
It's around $115,
Which is
quite a bit lower than that average analyst price target.
yeah, it is. So that kind of suggests that the market price right now might be a little inflated.
It could be.
Interesting. So we have this kind of push and pull, right?
Yeah.
On the one hand, Airbnb is doing well. They're growing. They're profitable.
Right.
But on the other hand, there are these concerns about the valuation and the competition.
Exactly.
So when we're thinking about Airbnb's long-term prospects, what should people really focus on?
I think the key thing is to look beyond just the short term.
Okay.
Think about their long-term vision.
So what is their vision for the future?
Well, they have some pretty ambitious plans for growth.
Okay. Love.
They want to optimize their core markets,
Okay.
expand even more into those global markets we talked about,
Right.
and they even want to start new businesses.
Entirely new businesses, beyond just accommodations.
Exactly.
Wow, those are some big goals. But are there any challenges they might face?
Of course. I mean, there are always challenges in business.
Right.
One big one is competition from those online travel agencies.
Like Expedia and Priceline.
Exactly. They're big players. And then there's the whole issue of regulations for short-term rentals.
Which can be tricky.
Yeah, they can be different everywhere.
Right.
And they can change really quickly.
So Airbnb has to be adaptable.
Yeah, for sure. And then, of course, their success really depends on their hosts.
Right. If the hosts aren't happy, they won't list their properties.
Exactly. So there are definitely some things to watch out for.
So it sounds like there's a lot of potential for Airbnb, but also a lot of uncertainty.
Right. Always a balance.
So what's the most important thing for someone to consider when they're trying to decide whether or not to invest in Airbnb?
It all comes down to execution.
What do you mean?
Well, Airbnb has all these great plans, but can they actually make them happen?
Can they actually deliver on their promises?
Exactly. Can they keep growing while also dealing with the competition and the valuation concerns?
So that's the big question.
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. And it's really up to each individual investor to decide.
Exactly.
They have to weigh the potential rewards against the risks.
And decide if Airbnb sits with their own investment goals.
Right. And how much risk they're comfortable with. So we've given you the information,
Yeah.
the insights, the different perspectives.
Right. We've laid it all out there.
But now it's up to you.
To do your own research.
Think about your financial goals
And maybe even talk to a financial advisor.
before making any decisions.
Exactly. Don't just jump in blindly.
Will said.
Hmm.
So remember, this deep dive is just a starting point.
It's a jumping off point.
It's not a recommendation.
It's food for thought.
Exactly. Speaking of food for thought, there's something that I was thinking about that wasn't really covered in the materials.
What's that?
We talked a lot about Airbnb's plans for expansion.
Right.
But what about the impact of artificial intelligence?
Oh, that's interesting.
Like, how could AI change the way people travel and use Airbnb?
That's a great question. AI is already changing so many industries.
It really is.
So it's definitely something to think about.
Like, imagine AI-powered recommendations
Oh, yeah.
that suggest unique places to stay based on your preferences and your past trips.
Yeah, that would be cool.
And what about AI-driven pricing?
Yeah, like prices that adjust based on demand.
So you always get the best deal.
Exactly. And maybe even AI-powered virtual assistants.
To help with bookings and answer questions.
Yeah, that could be really helpful.
So many possibilities.
It's exciting to think about.
It really is. And how Airbnb adapts to AI could really determine their future success.
I agree.
Maybe that's something we can explore in another deep dive.
I'd love to.
So to wrap things up today, we've taken a deep dive into Airbnb's stock performance.
We covered a lot of ground.
We looked at their recent performance and their plans for growth.
We talked about the analysts' opinions.
And we even touched on the potential impact of AI.
It was a good discussion.
But as always, we encourage you to continue your own research.
Don't just take our word for it.
Look into things yourself.
And make sure you're comfortable with the risks before investing.
Right, because investing always involves some level of risk.
Absolutely.
And if you enjoyed this deep dive,
We hope you did.
make sure to hit that subscribe button
And the bell icon.
so you don't miss any of our future analyses.
We've got some great ones planned.
We're passionate about bringing you insightful breakdowns of complex topics.
We want to help you understand the world better.
So join us on this journey of exploration and discovery.
We'd love to have you along.
Thanks for tuning in.
And until next time, keep those minds curious.